Hey, grade 11's third video on the nervous system. We're going to talk about the synapse. And the synapse is the space between axon terminal of one neuron. So remember, we have the axon and the little knobs at the end. And the dendrites, those are kind of like the little feelers of the next neuron. So it's actually empty space. And we're talking about thousandths of an inch here, very small space. But what happens is these synaptic knobs, when the electricity comes down to the end of the axon terminal, the electricity causes chemicals to be released into the synapse. So our nervous system is part electrical and part chemical. So they call that electrochemical. That synapse, these chemicals are called neurotransmitter. Neuro refers to the brain or nervous system. Neurotransmitters like acetylcholine, that's kind of one of the big ones, are released from the synaptic knobs, these little guys, of the axon terminal into the synapse. Now, when those transmitters connect to a dendrite, so as soon as one of these little dots, which represent the neurotransmitters, touches a dendrite, that's the trigger, remember, like with a gun, for the next neuron to fire. Now, the synapse may connect to a few neurons or hundreds, depending on the location in the body. In the brain, they connect to a lot of different ones. And so that's why there's different pathways for things that you feel, whether it's a hot stove or something that you hear. There's a lot of different pathways that electrical and chemical signals pass around the brain. And that's why different information going in, we feel different and we recognize it as different. Our brain interprets it differently based on those pathways. Now, a couple things about the synapse. And we hear a lot today about drugs in society, etc. One of the big effects of drugs is how it affects the synapse. And certain drugs will affect the synapse. Things like caffeine and cocaine will stimulate neurons, so they will fire quicker, all right? Sort of gives you that high, as they call that, all right? There's more activity there within that. Things like nicotine can do that as well. It becomes very addicted to it, because when it's not in the body, there's sort of a craving for it to fire those synapses. So there's a little bit of a negative effect of that for sure. And alcohol tends to suppress it. And that's why people that are drunk, they tend to do things that they normally wouldn't do when they're sober. Sometimes that's funny or sometimes that's dangerous, but that's sort of the effect on the synapse with alcohol. Now, one of the diseases that's really related to the synapse is called Parkinson's. And I have a good friend who used to teach here at the school. He has Parkinson's, and he has tremors. It started out just kind of in his hand, and then it became both hands, and now it's quite a bit of the body. His doctors have got him on some drugs that have helped a little bit, so it hasn't progressed to the whole body. But if people with Parkinson's that are not, their whole body will tremor. And the reason that happens is when the neurotransmitters go into the synapse, they cause the neurons to fire. There's enzymes that get rid of those chemicals right away so that the neurons are ready to fire again. What happens with Parkinson's is the enzymes that break down the neurotransmitter, they're not fast enough. And so the neurons just keep firing and firing and firing and firing. It's kind of like an automatic gun. It just keeps going instead of a pause and allow the neuron to reset. It just keeps firing one after another. So you can't really control your muscles because they keep firing. And so this Parkinson, these tremors are a real sign of that. And it's certainly, it's something that is something you'd never want to have. But fortunately, they are finding some drugs that are able to sort of mimic how the enzymes get rid of the neurotransmitters. So it's sort of cutting down on those tremors. So that's a positive sign. Okay, guys, take care. I'll talk to you soon.